It is Tuesday again, so once again I bring you greetings from the church staff here at Tucker First Methodist. For this week, I want to give you some results of the survey that you have been filling out. We sent that survey out a little over a week ago, about a week and a half ago, and in the first week that it was out, we had I think 224 responses, and that's actually family units, not individuals. And we know from one of the questions on the survey that in the majority of those, there are at least two people in the household, sometimes more than that. And I think that's good response. I thank you for taking the time to complete the survey. If you have not had a chance to do that, we continue to get those in and would welcome your participation in that. For today, I want to highlight some of the responses from that survey, just a few things that were of interest to me and some things that might be pertinent for us. And to lead into that, this morning, I was thinking about a story out of the first chapter of Acts that was leading into the day of Pentecost. And before that event of Pentecost, we read that the disciples were together. They were talking about one of their number, Judas, no longer being with them and how they needed to replace him, an important decision they had to make. And what we read there in the first chapter of Acts is that they devoted themselves to prayer, asking for clarity. And I'm not sure what clarity meant for the disciples in that context, but after their prayer for clarity, what they wound up doing was casting lots to see which person was going to replace them. In these days, sometimes I feel like my prayers for clarity might be better served if I just roll dice to see what the dice said in response. But with all of these numbers and responses to the surveys, we are looking at those. We are praying about those. We are praying for clarity and for guidance that God will lead us into right decisions as we move forward. So again, I thank you for taking the time to fill those out. We are using these, and I wanted to share with you just some of the responses that were on the survey. I'm going to talk about a few of these, not the full thing, but a few of them, and then I think you're going to be able to see some charts and graphs of these numbers as well. First of all, one of the first questions on the survey pertained to the age of people. This was just general information about the people taking the time to respond. And if you take a look at the graph on that, you will find that it's pretty significant that the highest response that we had were people from the age 65 to 74. And then the second highest response was from people aged 55 to 64. And then the third highest was people aged 75 and above. And I think those are pretty significant numbers. First of all, they probably reflect a lot of the makeup of our congregation, but I think they also represent the people that are most impacted by some of the COVID-19 virus. And that upper age group that I happen to be in is the group that's showing a lot of concern for that. And it was interesting to me the age breakdown for the people that were responding. Just a second general interest question about demographics. It had a gender breakdown, and if you look at the chart on that, 70% of the people that responded were female, and that was quite a bit of difference just in gender in terms of the response. And the third general question or response that I wanted to highlight pertained to attendance. And of the 224 families that responded to our survey, 87% of the people said that they had been looking at some of our worship videos that we have been putting out since we stopped the in-person worship from taking place. 87%. And I think that, again, was a fairly significant number. There's a couple of other things that I want to mention from those general questions to begin with. One of the other questions asked for people's response about the guidelines that have been in place about social distancing and sheltering in place. And the response to that indicated 70% of the people that responded in our congregation think that those guidelines are appropriate. And if you look at the graph, we'll see that an additional 16% feel like those guidelines did not go far enough, and then only 14% felt like the guidelines went too far. 86% think they're either appropriate or did not go far enough. And then one final question about the general information that we gathered from these was about people's comfort level in returning to in-person worship. And in looking at this, both from our church staff looking at the responses and also our health and welfare committee taking a look at these responses to date, we felt like this question might have been a question that had some ambiguity, a little bit of uncertainty, whether people were responding to the question based on the way that things are now, and right now is the most current information that we have, or if people were trying to project down the road whenever we are going to be able to come back together for in-person worship. There was some ambiguity about this question. All we can do is look at the way the responses came in terms of people's comfort level in returning to worship, and just the numbers on that. 41% of the people said that once we start in-person worship, they probably will wait at least a few weeks before they return to worship. They're not planning to return immediately when we start in-person worship. Another 33% said that they did not foresee returning to in-person worship in the foreseeable future. That's more than just the first few weeks. And I don't want to guess what people are thinking with that. But one of the things I have heard is that until there is some type of vaccine for the COVID-19, that a significant number of people are going to be very cautious before they start getting back out. And then there was an additional 26% of our people, roughly 1/4 of the congregation, that said that they would come back to worship this Sunday if it were allowable. And I thought that was pretty significant where people are. 1/4 of our people ready to come back right now. 3/4 either not going to come back when we first start or not going to come back for a significant time after we start back to worship. And so those were some general interest questions that caught my attention. I also want to highlight 3 other questions that had a particular focus. This is with children's ministries and some things there that we're looking at right now. And 3 of the questions that I want to go over the responses, if you look at the graphs that we have, they may be a little bit misleading at first glance because the percentages that show on the graph are not the percentages I'm going to talk about. If you look at the very first one, this was from people within the 3 to 5 families that had children in the 3 to 5-year-old range, and you will notice that there was about 75% of that chart that is one section on it, but those were people that do not have children in this age bracket. And so what I want to do is to give the numbers that reflect the people that do have children in this bracket. And of the ones that responded, 76% of the responses of people that have children in the 3 to 5-year-old bracket said that at this point they would not allow their children to return to in-person Sunday school if their class were available. And only 24% said that they would allow their children to come back right now. That was for children in the 3 to 5-year-old bracket. The second question dealt with families that have children in the nursery, And again, the same thing is true for the percentages there. The numbers I'm going to give simply reflect the ones that have children in that bracket. 82% of our families that have children in the nursery said that they would not be willing to allow their children to come back in the nursery at this point, and only 18% indicated that they would have an opening to or be considerate of children coming back at this time. And then the final question that I want to mention pertaining to the children's department pertains to families that have children in the elementary age group. And there, 55% of our families said that they are not ready for their children to return to Sunday school or in-person gatherings, and 45% said that they would be more open to that. And that was the closest breakdown that we had in those departments. But still, over half of our families said that they are not ready yet for in-person gathering to take place. What all of this means, we are trying to be as discerning as we can be to make informed decisions. And I think that from the results of this survey, continuing to look at guidance from our conference, continuing to look at things from the Center for Disease Control and our newly formed Health and Welfare Committee, as well as the church staff having a voice in this, that we will be able to make some informed decisions. And as soon as we know what all of that is going to look like, when we feel like we know a date that we are going to be able to work towards in-person worship resuming and in-person gatherings taking place, we will let you know about that. When we have that in mind, we will have some clear guidelines that we're going to be following, and we will make sure that everyone is aware of those. Until that time comes, I ask you to continue to be in prayer for the people that are engaged in this process and trying to look through all of this information to make the very best and most informed decisions that we can possibly make. We don't want to resort to casting dice just to make decisions on something this important. We are prayerful about this. We are looking at some of the information from experts. We are looking at the information from the results of our congregation. And with all of that, we will try to do the very best that we can in making informed decisions. And when we do have those definitive decisions, we will let you know. Until that time comes, again, I ask you to please keep me and all of our church staff in your prayers. You are in our prayers. And as we move towards the future where we anticipate, hopefully not too much longer, before we are able to offer in-person gatherings, until that time comes, know that you are present with us in our thoughts and in our prayers, and we covet your prayers as well. God bless you this day and in the week ahead.